The most widely published book in human history reveals that we are created in the image of God. Throughout our human journey, each encounter is an opportunity to see the shared humanity in ourselves and others. Regardless of one's views on religion, each experience and each story weaves us together towards a common path. A path of transformation, a process of growth and understanding, a recognition that, at our core, we share a common destiny. What does the search for truth really mean in our lives? How can we find a sense of unity in a world so diverse and divided? As we reflect on these questions, we start to uncover a fundamental connection that binds us all beyond our differences. Welcome to Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities, with our host, Wade Franson. Tonight's episode is the Sower of Black Field.
Good evening, everyone. It's your host, Wade Franson, and I could not be more excited about tonight's program. We have a woman who has a diverse background with a variety of experiences, but her most recent accomplishment is to write a work of historical fiction based on real life events, which just so happens to be on this very day #1 in new releases for historical biographical fiction, and way up there in other categories as well. The woman's name is Katherine Koch, and I'd like to welcome her into the studio to get started right away. Welcome to the studio, Katherine.
Thank you, Wade, to be here.
Well, it's really good to have you here. I've been anticipating this. I've been reading your book. I've been learning about you and what you're going to share on the show tonight. And I know the audience will just love this show. I'll mention right up front, in case some of the audience is seeing a little bit of blurring on Katherine's camera. This was a little bit of a technical issue that we were unable to fix, so we're just going to go with it. Hopefully it won't detract too much from anyone's enjoyment of the episode. So Katherine, as we always do in our show, we like to get to know the real you by talking about your creation story. Where do you come from? Who were your parents? What were the circumstances that you were born into as you grew and developed before you took conscious thought to the path that you were going to travel? So share with our audience a little bit about your earliest experiences. And I know you have slides too, which you can at any time just ask me and I'll share those slides.
Okay, the very first one, because I have some graphics there.
Absolutely. Let's just bring those in.
Okay, let's go to the, here's our nice titles. Go to the next one.
So that's the cover of the book. The thing that they don't see is, let me see if I can bring myself to the foreground. Is that your book? I don't know if they can see that down the corner. Your book has awards. It's an award-winning book. I just wanted to mention that because I don't see them on this cover. But anyway, here we go.
All right. Yeah. So yeah, I'm Katherine Koch, and I was born in Sharon, Pennsylvania on April 28th, 1996. Sharon, if you're a small town that's 60 miles northwest of Pittsburgh. And it's been the native place of the Koch family for 5 generations now. And my family and I moved to Ohio when I was 5 years old. So, my native place is the Tri-City area in Warren and Youngstown. And the whole entire, me, my parents, and my brother Sean, we all moved to San Antonio in 2019. And with the whole entire locating, that really tells you just who we are. So 3 things I really appreciate from my upbringing. The values that my parents instilled, very practical, very open-minded. They taught me, don't fear people who look different from you and think differently from you. Have a conversation, learn something from them, and let them learn something from you. And be suspicious of blanket statements, especially when applied to a group of people. And in terms of faith, my parents were both products of Catholic schools. And when it came time for my brother and I to go in school, they put us in public schools, and they made sure that we had all of the the fundamentals of Catholicism and the moral guidance, but they basically said, we're going to let you determine this journey for yourself. And, in retrospect, I'm really glad that they did that, because for me, when you find a reason for faith within, you end up having a deeper, conviction because of it. And that's the way that I feel. And the one thing that they were definitely very adamant about was education. My brother and I were both very much immersed in the rigors of an academic environment. We were both high school valedictorians. We both graduated summa cum laude in college. And I went to Kent State University, which had a chapter of Phi Beta Kappa. And I was inducted as a member in 2003. And when I was trying to figure out a major for myself, I grew up and I was always, very creative. And I thought, well, I want to go into fine arts. And my parents said, why don't you rethink that and go into computer science instead? And so as a result, I ended up being a web developer, graphic designer, marketing professional, a historian, and a writer. And that's why I call myself a Renaissance woman, really all over the map. So that's pretty much the formation of me.
Awesome. Do you want me to go to the next slide?
Yeah, I think that would be great. So I would like to tell you about here, to tell you like my background on faith. And when I, in my life, I always kind of felt that faith was a divisive force. Look at how much it actually creates extremism and even violence. That align with who I believed. And suddenly, this story about a relative of mine who was in Germany, and Viktor Koch, who was a member of the Passionist order. And then I first heard of the Passionists, and when I realized what they were about, ideas changed. So you might ask, okay, well, who are the Passionists? Congregation in the Catholic Church. They were founded in 1720, an Italian mystic named St. Paul the Cross. Based in Italy, but they have provinces all over the world, too, here in the United States. And the theology focuses on the passion of Christ. In a nutshell, a Passionist would say Christ is present in all who suffer, all who are persecuted and marginalized, all who are neglected and alone. God, you must look beyond the common divisions and by society. I mean, this is really tough if you think about it. I mean, suffering any different for a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim or an atheist? Of course not. This about it is it emphasizes the connection we all have and see the divine in all of us, to see life as sacred. And it calls upon to show each other compassion and healing. And I'm really right about that. And what really blows my mind is, can you imagine this message here being Germany? Because that's what Viktor did. I mean, that amazes me. Yeah.
So I'm going to just pause there for a moment, and we can get to that fourth slide. But when we were talking in the studio before the show, and this came up about what the heart and core of the Passionists were, two verses came to my mind. The first being Hebrews 5, verse 8, that although Jesus was a son of God, he learned obedience through the things he suffered. Now, we've actually been talking about this here locally for a few weeks now. We do a weekly devotional discussion with a variety of quotes from the different world religions. Sort of, I function, I guess, a little bit like a chaplain. My wife and I go to a assisted living facility or a nursing home, and we're talking to the residents there who are in that phase of their life where they're beginning to exit this life. And we've been talking a lot about this mysterious. It's interesting that a mystic founded that, because it's maybe difficult to grasp Jesus being the Son of God, and yet he learned obedience through the things he suffered. And we've talked then about suffering and the suffering that we've experienced in our life. So I can appreciate the effect it had on you when you learned that. The other verse is
Yeah.
also in Hebrews, and it's 12 verse 6, for whom the Lord loves, he chastens and scourges every son whom he receives. And of course, Jesus was scourged. That's part of his passion, right? He was, beaten and whipped to within an inch of his life already before he was forced to carry that cross and then be nailed to it. Or some say it was a stake, not a cross, whichever it was, depending on whether you were crucified like this on a stake or like that on a cross. There's different interpretations of those words. But so the question that came to mind, and I just realized as you were talking, so did Jesus suffer as a Jew because he was born a Jew, or did he suffer as a Christian because he was the Christ, right? The anointed one.
No, the
And the answer is it doesn't matter. It's a stupid question, right?
I say he suffered as a human. That was
Right.
the divine took human form, and I'll tell you right now, it's obvious I'm not a theologian, but the way that I see it is, I think God wanted to look us in the eye and say, I get it now. Through in Catholic doctrine, if you believe in the Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, basically you can say, I was the victim. I was the parent of a victim. I have experienced that dimension of pain on multiple levels. I get it. I think that it was God's attempt to tell us, I understand. I've been through this now. That's my perspective.
Well, and of course you have the book of Job, which I studied really a lot for an entire year, my sophomore year, when I was getting my undergraduate degree with a major in theology, because in our order, our denomination, if you will, the book of Job symbolized self-righteousness, right? Job was labeled as self-righteous within our group. And that, if you suffered from the sin of self-righteousness, which I was kind of arrogant, and I felt that, I was somewhat self-righteous as a sophomore, I wanted to get to the bottom of this thorny sin that in our particular denomination, that was like the cancer is self-righteousness. That's like the worst sin you could have because you're blind to it. You can't see it when you are self-righteous. So I studied that book Job every week, right? I basically read the book of Job once a week, and I fasted once a week in my sophomore year to try to get to the bottom of this. And I came to a completely different conclusion, that the book of Job wasn't about self-righteousness at all. It was an attempt to introduce a New Testament understanding in the Old Testament, that understanding of suffering, so all the Jews could appreciate and understand the Messiah, because the book of Job is in there.
Yeah.
Because, that was a difficult thing. They were expecting the conquering king, the all-glorious king, to come and rescue them from the Romans. And that's not what Jesus did specifically, physically. Anyway, we're off track. We're talking about your origin story, but there's a lot of meat here, right? So did you want to go to the last slide?
Because I think this is going to tell a lot of people, it's going to say a lot about the journey. And I think this is going to surprise a lot of people when they see this slide. So next one. There we go. All right. So I think when people see this, they're really going to be shocked, first of all, by the depth of the research, and also by how long this has been going on. It has been a 20-year journey, and there are not many historical fiction novelists who write peer-reviewed papers, but I do. And, for the longest time, I've been worried about historians saying to me, well, you have a case here where you've got an American defending Germans, against Americans, and he's saying that these people are innocent of an atrocity. I've studied this history for decades, and I've never heard anything like this. You're a computer science major and a web developer. Who are you to be writing something like this? And I've also crossed paths with academics who have said, I'm suspicious of stories that are written by family members. I mean, how objective can you be? And I mean, I do get that perspective, and I will say that I've done my best to try to guard against it. But I will say for this specific story to come to light, you really did need a family member, because some of the primary sources were 70-year-old letters that were collecting dust in the attics of distant relatives. And not only that, but I mean, as you can see, I went to Schwarzenfeld in 2005, and also collecting the story required going there and collecting oral histories from eyewitnesses who typically don't like talking about the past, but they will talk to a relative of their personal hero. And so when I got to this stage, I wanted to be able to look academics in the eye and say, I've done the research, I've presented at conferences, I've written peer-reviewed papers, and I've actually collaborated with other academics. And in fact, one of them you can see in that photo from 2004. That was taken at the Passionist archives, and the man in the middle there is Father Rob Carbonneau. And aside from being a Passionist priest, he also has a PhD in history from Georgetown University. And he's been my guide these whole entire, these past 20 years on doing research, on the Passionists. And another academic that I've been working with is Dr. Christopher Mariello from Salem State University in Salem, Massachusetts. He's the director of Holocaust and Genocide Studies at the university. And we co-presented a paper in 2013 and at this conference. And he has extensively researched the American army coming into Germany, and basically he coined this term forced confrontation. So he's done extensive research into cases like Schwarzenfeld. And in fact, he's written a book that's called Forced Confrontation, The Politics of Dead Bodies in Germany at the End of World War II. So if you're interested in the bare bones facts on the Americans coming into Germany, I definitely encourage you to look up that one. So, yeah.
Awesome. So what we're going to do now is go to our first commercial break, having covered your background and how your journey to get to that book. And that will also give people a little bit of insight into that. When we come back, we'll talk about the next phase of actually, what it is about that story that particularly fascinated you, the process of writing it, and getting it published. And then we'll go into what the reaction has been to that. So don't go anywhere. We'll be getting into the meat of this story here right after this short commercial break, which features actually her book.
What is an American doing behind enemy lines? It's unexpected, but unexpected things have happened in this town. I've nurtured a crop of good souls here. They circulated petitions and protest. They yearned for freedom of speech and religion. They learned American ideals from me. They lived the doctrine of my religious order, the Passionists. They know that pain binds us all, regardless of nation or race. Protecting them from Nazism was hard enough, but I never imagined the nightmare I'm facing now. The SS have left a mass grave nearby. It's horrific. The Americans have arrived. They're holding the town responsible. The townspeople have orders to wash and clothe 140 bodies, make a coffin for each, dig a grave trench, hold a funeral ceremony. We have 24 hours to see all this through. 24 hours. And if we fail, the Americans will execute every German man in this town between 16 and 60. Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. Help me pull off a miracle.
What a what a powerful video that gives us a synopsis but leaves plenty of mystery and intrigue that I'm sure, I've gotten partway through the book. It's just a matter of time. But even in those opening sections, the book drives you through. And I will bring up again what I mentioned at the beginning. Today on Amazon, it is the #1 in the historical biography, fictional biography category, I believe it is. So, so tell me then a little bit more about your immersion into the details of the book and the story of uncovering this.
Yeah, definitely. Do you want to bring up those slides again and go to, yeah, because I want to show a picture of the real guy and tell you a little bit about who he was. And here we go. So yeah, this is my relative, Father Viktor Koch. And to give you an understanding of the relation, he is my grandfather's uncle, on my father's side. So my father's father's brother. And he was the eldest son of the first members of my family to immigrate from Germany to the United States. He was born in Sharon, Pennsylvania, same place as me. And as far as what he was doing in Germany, in the 1920s, the Passionists in the USA began launching missions to foreign lands. And Father Viktor was tapped to establish a new branch of the Passionist order in Germany. And he was perfect for this because he grew up in a community of German immigrants and he knew the culture and the language. So he successfully established 3 monasteries. The first one is in Munich. The second one you see there is in Austria. And the third one is in Schwarzenfeld. And that's the location of greatest importance because that's really where the Sower of Black Field takes place. And that's where the most climactic events happen. So in the process of creating this province, Father Viktor witnesses the rise and fall of Nazi Germany behind enemy lines. And actually, if you want to go to the next slide, Wade, I wanted to show you this map for a couple of reasons. First of all, I mean, it kind of gives you a sense of geography. And it shows you where Schwarzenfeld is located. But this map is important for us another reason. You'll notice the location of monastery number 2, which is in Austria. And you'll say, okay, well, why is that important? It's important because he resides there just long enough to meet the residency requirements to get Austrian citizenship. And you might say, well, who cares about that? Why is that important? Well, when the Nazis take control of Germany and they begin declaring these rules that restrict the Catholic Church, one of them is that all priests in Germany, if you want to perform pastoral duties for German citizens, you have to be a German citizen yourself. No foreigners are allowed to perform those. You're not allowed to celebrate Mass. You're not allowed to hear confessions, none of that. Now, clearly, if Father Viktor is born in the United States, he's an American citizen, and that's a big problem for him. But because he has that Austrian citizenship, that changes things. And you might say, well, why is that? Well, if you remember your history, you remember that in 1938, Germany annexes Austria. And when the Anschluss happens, all Austrian citizens are immediately granted German citizenship. So if he has Austrian citizenship, he's a German citizen. That means that he can legally stay and preach in Nazi Germany. He gets around that law. So I'd like to go to the next slide because this is going to make a really important point. So let's ask ourselves seriously, why should we believe that the people of Schwarzenfeld paid any attention to Father Viktor? Why is this not just wishful thinking? Why is it that they didn't say, well, he's a foreigner, who cares what he says? And that's why these slides are so important. So let me paint the context. It's these people that you're seeing, it's 1933, 1934. These people are living in the middle of the Great Depression. And as bad as it was in the States, it was way worse in Germany. The country had to pay war reparations. And so the people that you're looking at, they're desperate. Unemployment is rampant. They have no jobs. Now, suddenly, this American priest is showing up and he needs to have a monastery built in this town. And he's hiring. And he has, to give you an idea, he has the modern day equivalent of millions of dollars to make this happen. Millions of American dollars. So not only is this guy ministering to their spiritual needs, he is rescuing them from poverty. He's taking care of their physical needs as well. This gives him a profound influence over this local population. So what you are really looking at is this formation of a highly unique microcosm. You have a mega popular American priest because he's saving them from poverty. He's preaching a message of the Passionist, which directly challenges Nazi ideology. He's empowered by a pulpit, which really scares the Nazis, and he's legally allowed to stay in the Reich. So, I mean, any of those conditions would be amazing in themselves, but for all of them to happen in this little town, that creates something that is very unique. So, yeah.
So I want to pause there real quick because I'm loving this, especially because I've already read the parts of the book that kind of map this out, and I love how you're laying this out. But I'm afraid of a couple things. One, that you're going to give a little bit too much away, because people should really buy this book and read it. Not that we're shilling in books and making money, but there's just so much there. Secondly, I don't want to spend too much time going through every aspect of this, because we won't have time to talk about what it means for us and in the current situation. So I want to, we can go back to the slides, but we're going to have to go through them more quickly and or just cover them without them, however you want to handle that.
All right. So you want to just like quickly go through the rest of them? All right.
Sure.
Awesome.
That works. So, but I love, so somebody asked in the chat how this is resonating with me. Pretty sure I shared with you, I spent 10 years in Germany. Among other things, I shared that when I was there in the 80s, to your point, I never met a single German. And even though I was there in the 80s and 90s, so there were a lot of people still alive that had been in World War II. And I was also in the ministry. And so I was working with people of a certain age, right? Older people. And nobody would admit to ever having known anything, right? But I'm aware of a lot of the surrounding ongoing history. And I just love how you're bringing all this to light and making it real, and doing so in a way that allows people to really deeply reflect, not just on this aspect of history, like you're studying some frog in biology and you're dissecting it, but really asking those essential human questions about us, our society, which we're going to get into here towards the end of the program.
Okay, excellent. So I'll go through these really, really fast. Now, the reason why I wanted to show you this collection of photos is because they really do, they tell the story of oppression that Viktor himself is under. He came to establish monasteries in Germany, and you can see 2 of them are being taken away from him. Those are the pictures that are on the left. And at the point when he's being taken out of the monastery in Schwarzenfeld, he basically takes a stand and says, "Okay, I'm going to stay here." And what they do, what he does, is he entrenches himself in this little dingy flower sacristy, and that's the photo that you see on the right. And I mean, when I went to Schwarzenfeld and I stood in that room, it's the size of a walk-in closet. It was amazing to me how small it was. And, I will say that what this really made me appreciate, I mean, he's under oppression. And as an American, it made me realize, I mean, all of you who are listening here, can you name the 5 freedoms in the Constitution and the First Amendment? Petition, press, assembly, speech, and religion. Can you imagine living in the grip of a hostile regime where you have none of those? I really wanted Americans to feel that through this character of Father Viktor. I wanted to show, how with his identity as a Passionist, how is that helping him cope? How did his American values give him a discernment and an objectivity that the Germans did not have? And even more importantly, how did his views on all of this impact the Germans who were looking to him for moral and spiritual guidance? This really, I mean, everything that we're looking at, these are actually not spoilers. This is the heart of the novel that we're talking about right here. And this is why you're going to find it's completely different from any World War II story you've seen or heard. So, let's quickly go to the next one. Basically, when I made the statement that the Germans wanted to talk to me, I wanted a graphic to support that. This image here, we went to Schwarzenfeld in 2005, and we went to Sunday Mass. And immediately afterward, I had all of these Germans that, from that time period, flocking around me. And one of the things that I feel it's very necessary to say is there was no self-interest on their part. This wasn't like, hey, tell my story. They wanted to tell me about Viktor and how much he meant to them. And in the process of listening to their stories, I asked, well, tell me your story. Tell me what you remembered from that time. And it really gave me a very nuanced understanding. And really quickly, let's go to the next one, because this follows the same idea. So in the story, you're going to encounter other characters besides Viktor. Now, the names and the relationships are going to be fictional, but that was just because I wanted a narrative that flowed, nice and easy. But what these characters do is they reenact the stories of real people, and I just wanted to show you their faces and names. So the very first one at the top is Frau Barbara Friese, and her experiences play out through the viewpoint character of Frau Helena Heidel. And the man you see beside her is Norbert Gindelate. That's a real person. I used his real name because the stories that I heard from his family, I was listening to this and I was like, this doesn't sound like the Germans that I was expecting. These do not sound like Germans in Nazi Germany. They've been changed. And, is it any wonder that there's a Passionist down the road telling them Christ is present in all who suffer? And at the bottom is this German fellow named Herr Nicholas Kainz. He was a child in Nazi Germany and a former Hitler Youth. And his stories are infused into the viewpoint character of Klaus Heidel, Helena's eldest son. So what I really want to emphasize is that I know that we need to end the segment pretty soon, but what I really wanted to emphasize is when I went into this, I had this feeling like, we have a very black and white understanding of Germans in Nazi Germany, and I definitely want to revisit that question you keep on asking, Wade, because I've thought a lot about it, about the Germans who say we have no idea that any of this happened. What I realized is, we have this image of these people that are the architects of the Holocaust on one side, and then we've got the people like Dietrich Bonhoeffer and Sophie Scholl and Klaus von Stauffenberg who are directly taking on the system and and making the ultimate sacrifice. But what I realized is there are a million shades of gray between these two poles, and that's where the nuance is. That's what I was getting. And that's what I realized, that, okay, these people they're not Klaus von Stauffenberg, they're not Sophie Scholl, but they are doing meaningful indirect acts of resistance that I found fascinating.
So many questions. I'm going to throw out a couple of them. The first one is going back to those 5 freedoms. Mm-hmm. Petition, press, assembly, religion. What was the 5th one?
Speech.
Petition, speech. Okay, thank you. We'll come back to that later. I just wanted to make sure I had them down. The second one is just basically author, publisher perspective. Every time we see a movie, it's like based on real events. Any resemblance to real people is purely coincidental. You've gone a different route here. You're like, no, I wrote this person with his name. Did you have legal counsel on that? How do you handle that in terms of why do people always say, no, disclaim that there's nothing real here? And you're saying, no, there's some very real things in here, even though I had to use some artistic liberty for the narrative arc.
Family permission. That's... Yep.
So you got explicit permission for those people. Awesome. The other thing I wanted to bring up here is that, and I hate to bring this up, but it's reality. Christianity, and even the Catholic Church bears some responsibility for portraying the Jews in a negative light, Christ killers kind of thing. And there are historical situations in which, they're incredibly shameful for the Catholic Church. And here you've got this order that is turning that on its head. And you said, seeing Christ in everyone, seeing Christ in the Jew who historically is labeled as having rejected Christ. That is awesome and amazing.
Tell me about it. And that was one of the reasons why I felt like, I really need to tell this story. And if people discover the Passionist because of this, that's awesome.
Awesome. So I think we had a couple more slides. Let's quickly
really quick.
Go back to them. Let me see if I can rearrange here again and get it right.
Yeah.
So that we can feature the slides. There we go. Next slide.
So I want to very, very quickly gloss over, because people who have not read this book, I'm sure that everybody's like, well, what is this atrocity? What actually happened that precipitated this? So I want to touch upon that. So first of all, this all starts early in April of 1945. Patton's Third Army it's starting to sweep deep into Germany. And the SS who are in charge of concentration camps, especially in the South, they realize that, hey, they're coming and they're about to liberate our prisoners. And so what they do is they start herding them on trains to get them away from the front. And one of these concentration camps, it's a labor camp, is Flossenburg. And you see where it is up on the top of that map there. And on April 15th, about one train with about 750 prisoners follows the route that you see here. Now, what happens is, on this trip, it gets strafed by American low flyers. And you might say, Americans, why would they do that? The reason why is because the Americans have been told, if you see a train passing through German territory, it's carrying troops and supplies to the east, you have to stop it. They have absolutely no clue whatsoever that these trains might be carrying concentration camp victims. And so they get shot at 3 times on this trip. And the worst attack happens in Schwarzenfeld's train station. The engine is completely destroyed, and some of the prisoners are unfortunately, they die in the attack. But when it's over, the SS realized, okay, if we're going to proceed, we have to do this on foot. So they execute any Jews who are incapable of walking onward, and then they continue death marching the rest. And so this leaves 140 bodies in Schwarzenfeld's train station, and the Americans are just hours away. So let's go to that final slide there.
Sorry, I don't know why it's not. There we go.
It's just the way that it is. Okay, so this is what brings about this crisis of the story. The Americans see this mass grave, this atrocity, and they are just absolutely just beside themselves. They are just outraged that this happened. And they figure that, okay, the whole entire town of Schwarzenfeld, they're full of Nazis, they're responsible. And the American commander, as you saw in that clip, basically says that the town is ordered to tend these victims in 24 hours. And if they fail, the Americans will execute all the German men in this town between 16 and 60. And if you wonder, well, why 16 and 60? The reason why is because this covers the age of anybody who would have been a combatant in the German army, plus anyone who would have been conscripted in the home front militia, the Volkssturm. So to Schwarzenfeld's great fortune, Father Viktor is here. He musters every man, woman, and child to fulfill this ultimatum, and he confronts the Americans, his very own countrymen, and defends the Germans. And now what this book does is it gives you some time to walk in his shoes and to walk in the shoes of the Germans. And you start to realize that, they've been protected by Passionist ideology this whole time. He knows they're not Nazis. And, so in essence, thanks to him, the town was saved without a bullet fired. So, yeah, that's all of the history that I want to cover for this.
Awesome. So thank you so much. We are now going to take a quick break. I have to showcase another author, another book that we chose to have for one of our commercial breaks. This is the same period, different situation, somewhat more well-known, but unknown to most people, in which the Hungarian government had a regent over Serbia, Admiral Horthy, who took, and Admiral Horthy was an elder statesman. He was one of the first, or he was the first anti-Semitic statesman in Europe. Hitler looked up to him. One suggested title for this book was Hitler's Mentor. And it's about an atrocity with a mass grave, not for 145, but 3,000 people that were murdered and thrown in a hole in the ice under Horthy's oversight in Hungarian-controlled Serbia. We will be right back to dig into the details of your story, however, right after this commercial break. That's a book written by Alexander Velchik, who did original historical research similar to what you did, though he was visiting graveyards, categorizing the names of all the people and speaking to a few who still survived about their dead relatives, and gathering together and putting together the pieces of the story from that area of the world. The book was published in 2014. 2012, and in 2015, the UN unveiled some of the archives from World War II and corroborated some of those events. Horthy was never brought to justice because he was respected by Stalin as a general, and he was an ally of the United States in the subsequent Cold War and efforts. So, in the fight. Anyway, he was an ally in the fight against the Germans with America. So off on a tangent, I apologize, but I wanted to share why we showed that particular video. So back to your story now. So many differing perspectives. We talked, and I don't know if it was in this show or right before, about on the one hand, you have the evil Nazi collaborators, and on the other hand, you have people who sacrifice their lives to save the life of another, and yet you have every shade of gray in between those. And naturally, my experience, people not wanting to talk about it or admit they knew anything, knowing how much they would be judged, much easier to say we knew nothing, much easier to paint yourself as entirely white when that is in fact not true. You are a shade of gray. We are all shades of gray. Anyway, so tell me a little bit about the aha moments, the self-discovery that you experienced in going through this and writing the book.
Yeah, I keep on thinking about this conversation that we've had. I think over several times, where you've talked about, none of the Germans want to say what they know. And what I reflected on is context.
Well, and they have a word for it, right? I mean, that was this particular era. Maybe it was just that particular era. Vergangenheitsbewältigung, right? The ability to somehow come to grips with the past. I mean, this is every movie that had villains had Nazis in it, right? Everyone that wanted to, insult the Germans would call them a Nazi, right? You have to live with this black mark on your entire nation. You're on all the people. You're all painted with the broad brush of labels.
See, that's exactly what I've realized in researching this. Context is everything. Horthy has a context. When I say context, I'm talking about how much indoctrination did they get, what did they do, and what were they exposed to. Horthy has a context. You can also say that people that lived around a concentration camp had a context. You could honestly say to them, folks, you saw white flakes coming down from the sky.
You could smell it. You could smell it. Right?
You really think that was snow? You know, you can say to somebody who lived in Berlin, hey, folks, I mean, you did see the glass windows of these Jewish shops being busted on Kristallnacht. You know, can you really say you knew nothing? Yeah, but also Catholic Bavaria has its own context. You've got these little towns that are like blink and you miss it towns that are surrounded by an ocean of farmland, you know, and they, I mean, especially if they're a Catholic town, they are under their own oppression because the Nazi regime is trying very hard to get rid of anything that is going to come between them and their message and the German people. So, I mean, they have their own context in a Catholic community. And Schwarzenfeld, with an American over here, you know, an American Passionist who's telling them Christ is present in all who suffer, they have a context that is entirely separate from all of that. So what I realized is that context is everything, number one. And I also realized, because I know that people, seriously, I know that people are looking at me and saying, you know, I mean, I'll tell you, it's really weird being an American and I mean, this is not my history. And if people are looking at me and saying, how can you say this? You know, it's like suddenly I'm responsible. I'm speaking on these people's behalf. And, you know, and I think that that's the reason why Viktor came to the States and said nothing. We did not find out about this from him. It took like, you know, that I can tell you, you know, I can set up a whole nother episode just on that alone. But what I
and getting back to this thing about even Jesus learning obedience from what he suffered, mm-hmm. I can empathize with that for the simple fact that, you know, I was a victim of domestic kidnapping, smuggled out of the country, separated from both parents for 2 years and my sisters. The court case eventually went to the Supreme Court of Sweden. 2.5 years after all this started, I'm back in the U.S. With my mother, who was an alcoholic, which is why the whole thing started. Now I'm in school in the middle of 6th grade. And the teacher is standing me up in front of the class and saying, here's our new child from Sweden. And I'm like, I'm not Swedish, right? I'm an American. But I wasn't really American because I was born in Canada. And then the kids were all coming up and speak some Swedish for us. They were just being friendly, right? Mm-hmm. But my reaction was, I'm not your monkey. I'm not going to speak Swedish for you, right? Which immediately set me off. But again, context. Nobody could understand anything about what I went through. To them, I could tell I was somewhat of a curiosity, and I hated it. Mm-hmm. Right? Exactly. So, yes, this whole, I can relate to why Father Viktor didn't want to talk about it, or certain vets that are in Iraq, they come back and they, you know, post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah. So,
but having a little bit of empathy for those things it's hard fought and it's hard won, but it's so valuable.
Yes, it is. And I think another point that I would like to make is, I mean, knowing through this history and through researching it, how important context is. That the context that I know and the context that I can speak to is specifically Schwarzenfeld, you know, so I can't speak to the Germans who were in Berlin or the Germans who were living within, you know, distance of a concentration camp. I can't speak to Horthy, you know, but I can speak to what I have learned in Schwarzenfeld.
Awesome. So, so what has been the experience of getting that book completed? You know, I love that sort of arc of the 20-year story of you starting in 2005 and then going through these various phases, publishing your first paper about it, decisions along the way you had to make about how to write the story, and how it was unfolding and what the real story was. I'm sure you went through like 10 different versions of what the real story was here.
Yeah, I'll tell you, you know, the hardest thing about this specific research was just piecing it together after such a long time. You know that childhood game where you line up a bunch of kids and the first one whispers a story into the ear of another one, and then that repeats all the way through? Yeah, I mean, we learned it through word of mouth. And by the time we got the message, it was like totally distorted, and I mean, we got in touch with the people of Schwarzenfeld and we said, this is what we heard. They just about died laughing. And they said, you know what, you need to come over here and we need to set you straight because you don't know the real story. So, so first of all, piecing it together over such a long period of time, and also absorbing so much within a week. I mean, it took me a really long time to step back and really piece the context together. To give you a perfect example, when I was listening to these interviews, they kept on talking about refugees in their houses. And I was like, why are the refugees in their houses? They said the houses were so packed, the only room that didn't have somebody living in it was the bathroom. And I was like, what are they talking about? And then what I realized is on the German home front, 1942, 1943 onwards, the Germans who had settled like out in Poland, out in these outer areas, when the German army started getting pushed back, these people started flooding back into Germany, and there was nowhere for them to go. So Nazi welfare, the organization that was responsible for taking care of the German people, said, okay, if you've got a home, you need to admit these people that are coming back in. You need to admit these people back into your house, and you need to open up your guest rooms, your living rooms. And yeah, I had people saying, even in the hallways, we had people sleeping, So, I mean, can you imagine, having your house full of strangers? And not only that, but I really got a sense of the oppression that these people were under, especially like through Nicholas Kites, who was a child. And he had said, yeah, the teachers were telling us, if your mom and dad says something against the Reich, you need to tell us. Next thing you know, you get a knock on your door because your kid said something against the Reich. And, maybe you didn't come home. It was that scary. So these people had to be extremely careful of what they said, what they did. They had their houses were packed with strangers. I mean, there was so much, demanding their attention, so much oppression, so much hardship that when they say, yeah, we had no idea what was going on, I think of my own life. I mean, I'm not saying it's right, and I'm not condoning it, but what I am saying is, for me personally, that does ring true, because I think of all of the things that I deal with in my life and how busy I am. And if I had people in my house and I had to worry about what I say, I mean, how much attention would I be giving to everything else? So that, when I hear the people of Schwarzenfeld specifically say, we really didn't know, knowing what they were going through, it does ring true to me. I will say that.
Well, the reason, so allow me to unpack that comment a little bit. I was not at all seeking to place any blame,
right,
or accountability. Mm-hmm. My question was to understand,
right,
what was it like living under those circumstances, right? How did you feel?
Right.
How did you process it? How have you processed it since? Right. But they wouldn't open up at all. They weren't going to have that conversation. And of course, the context is you think about the short period of time. World War II ended, in the late 40s, mid to late 40s. Then you had, rebuilding 10 years of, the Marshall Plan. You had the German economic miracle. The time when I was there, I went there in 1984, they were just really back on their feet, right? You still had the provisional capital of Bonn, which is where I was. And the country was still divided into East and West Germany as a result of that war. Literally, the country was still divided. It's as if America was 30 states on one side and 20 on another. And people are asking you, so how was that war for you? It wasn't even resolved.
Right.
You follow me? And to your point, when you shared that the Americans came in and threatened to kill everybody, I know nothing, right? Automatic reaction. You could be trained from infancy and childhood. Don't say anything. You don't know anything. True. Like that rock opera Tommy. You didn't see anything. You didn't hear anything. And the boy grows up deaf, dumb, and blind, right? Mm-hmm. But what's fascinating to me in all this, and that's part of my curiosity from back then, is that let's fast forward and bring this to the current day, and we'll shift here to a commercial break and come back here shortly. But let's bring it into the current day. When COVID hit, this is a completely controversial topic. We're going to, by the way, have Jason Persoff back on the show. For those who watched it earlier, we had him on the show a couple of times during or short after COVID. He's an immunologist who was working in a hospital and shared his views and whatnot. We're going to have him back because the tide has shifted on the information that was available. But when right at the beginning and at the heat of COVID and the lockdowns and everything, because of my experience and having been on all sides of every issue, I was not eager at all to just rush headlong into all the lockdowns and believe everything I was being told.
Right.
And I had a responsibility in a local situation for making some decisions about what a certain community would and would not do. And the lockdown mentality made me very uncomfortable, and the mandatory enforcement on everybody made me very uncomfortable. The group that I was in was going to be even more draconian than the draconian society around us in this very COVID terrified region of a state that believes in social responsibility. So I was, by simply saying, look, there are different perspectives, I was labeled a spreader of lies and misinformation in a letter that was drafted and sent to a national organization. Mm-hmm. And I experienced that. Well, now the tide has turned, and many of the things that I was accused of spreading lies and misinformation were the tip of the iceberg of things that were 100% true, right? Mm-hmm. And now the shoe's on the other foot. But you have this same situation of denial and plausible deniability. And I didn't know anything, and we didn't really do those things. Yeah, you did. You did say those things. It's on video, right? Videos are being shown of people saying the things that they now claim they didn't say. Mm-hmm. So there's our own little sort of mini... I'm tempted to say tempest in a teapot, and it is compared to the Holocaust, but it's a whole lot more than a teapot, what happened around COVID and the decisions that were made. We have our own issues nationally and as a society that we have to reconcile, or, what's the word I'm looking for? That we should be processing and digesting and learning from. But it is so difficult to have those discussions because everybody would like to pretend they didn't do the things they did.
Right.
Because they might have been on the wrong side of an issue. They believed they were right. They believed they were doing the right thing. Their intentions may well have been pure. It's really hard for a human being who believes they're right and has good intentions to admit that they horribly hurt somebody else, maybe even killed somebody else as a result of decisions they made.
Right. Very true.
So how is all of that for you in terms of relating your deep dive into that microcosm within a cosm of a macrocosm, and sort of the Alice in Wonderland down the rabbit hole kind of situation?
It was, yeah. It really was, and I think that's why, it took me 20 years to really unpack it, and that's why having some guidance from like Chris Mariello and from other academics. That's why it was so important, was, first of all, to understand the context of what I was looking at and to understand how unique it was. I had no idea that, that the German Catholic Church was being as persecuted as it was. I didn't realize how unique it was that having an American who actually was able to preach. He should not have been able to do that, so yeah, it really did take a long time, doing the research to unpack, the unique story within the unique story within the unique story, even beyond that. Yeah.
Many layers of the onion. Well, we're going to go quickly to our last commercial break. A much more positive ad than the ones we've shown about being the change you want to see in the world and doing good. When we come back, we'll get into some of the audience comments, and there have been many. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome to the Royal Falcon Foundation. Our curriculum and activities inspire and train adolescents through hands-on experiences, fostering growth and empowerment. Through immersive and challenging experiences, we shape young minds to think independently and develop their leadership skills. Our programs foster new friendships and unity, shaping young leaders to tackle real-world challenges with confidence. We believe in equipping the next generation with the skills to become leaders of tomorrow. Join us at the Royal Falcon Foundation and be part of a journey that empowers, unites, and inspires. Double your impact with our matching grant. Until the end of 2025, every tax-deductible donation to the Royal Falcon Foundation up to $1,000 will be matched dollar for dollar. Visit our website to donate now or email info@royalfalconfoundation.org for more details. Together, we can make a greater difference.
So a comment about that video: if Jesus learned obedience through the things he suffered, and God chastens every son whom he loves, and he even uses the word scourge, how do we give children the kind of experiences that they need without being called into child protective services, right? Obviously, we're not going to in any way try to inflict pain and suffering on our children, though my kids, will often complain. I'm like, yeah, I love to torture you, right? I just love torturing you. Now pick that piece of trash up and throw it in the trash can, right? Yes, you're going to come out and help me gather firewood. Yes, we're going to go, mow the lawn and rake the leaves together. And yes, it's going to take an hour. And I'm sorry if it's a little cold out there, right? But the Royal Falcon Foundation really works hard to give children the kind of immersive, impactful, focused experiences that give that same benefit in a very positive, productive way, profound, positive experiences that can teach you. You'll have enough suffering along the way. We don't need to be the cause of that.
True enough.
Right. So anyway, okay, let's dive into some of the comments. I mean, there are a lot. We had quite a few live viewers. I wasn't really paying attention, but right now we're at 170 live on the show. So maybe it was more before, I don't know. So I don't know if you can see them. They're over there on the right. If you haven't, then that's probably good, because some of them were a little bit distracting. Somebody wanted us to give a summary of the slides, and somebody else generously did that for them in the chat, which we really appreciate. So people want to know more about the story, and I'm going to quickly not have you answer those, but just tell them go buy the book. We'll tell you about the book. Go buy the book.
Yes.
Yes, it looks like a movie. So looking for, let me look at one here I want to dive into, and of course you can call out one that you might want to address as well. This is an interesting one from Amelia Monroe. Crazy how a whole country's identity was erased overnight, only to be restored years later. History really does move fast. And of course, there's this Chinese curse, right? May you live in interesting times.
Heard of that, yes.
So yeah, what can you say about, Father Viktor's experience being an American? Now he had Austrian citizenship that allowed him to play the role of a German and accomplish certain things because he had that nationality.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I think, just kind of pondering it for a second, I mean, just what really strikes me is just how unique it was. And, he was really very much an opportunist. I've learned that from, what he does. He's actually a wizard at getting the Reich cobbled up in its own red tape. And so anytime that he sees an opportunity to use their own rules against them, he does that. He is a very, very shrewd leader. So I think that, yeah, he looked for every advantage that he possibly could, because I think that he saw what was happening in Germany, and he realized how desperately they needed a message so that they could see beyond what the Reich was imposing upon their own people.
Well, and yeah, that came clear in the early parts of the book that I read, where the Gauleiter, the regional governor, whatever, is coming in to get a tour of the monastery that he plans to confiscate, right? And Father Viktor is already sizing up the situation and calling the Austrian bishop, and it brought back my experience in Germany. And of course, everybody knows this. I was just following orders, right? So they were following orders in many cases. And so it's fascinating that you bring out that he tripped them up with their own laws. And didn't Jesus do this? Your
Yes.
law says this, right? And therefore this, right? Jesus was a master at doing that. And it's fascinating to see, calling out their hypocrisy, catching them in their own hypocrisy, if you will, or in this case, just loopholes and, illogic, or safe places within the law that was created that they actually adhered to their own law. So even, this is going to sound so horrible, but even the Nazis had a certain integrity. Everybody on earth believes they're right.
Mhm.
Everybody on earth believes that what they're doing is somehow good, right? And they're following some internal consistent logic and some compass. I discovered this profoundly when I was in Leningrad during the abduction of Gorbachev, and when there was this strong line, and tanks were coming from Moscow while I was coming in from Finland, and in this turmoil moment in history, the Russians, I was shocked at them saying some of the things they said. How could you believe that? And it struck me, of course, everybody believes they're right. Everybody believes the system they were brought up in is the true and accurate and correct one if they adopted it, and they're sincere in what they're doing.
Right.
They might be sincerely wrong, but they're sincere. And so to think about that and to recognize it, I think that's a necessary thing, to see Christ in everyone. And I want to share this. And somebody else asked about, the Passionists, and we're going to try to get some of the Passionist leaders on the show. You and I have talked about that by email. But here's the thing I want to highlight. One of the most profound sections of the Bible to me is the book of Matthew, because it's all about judgment. Jesus tells us not to judge. Do not judge. Judge righteous judgment. Don't judge by the outside, and we're not capable of judging the heart. Only God can judge the heart. So do not judge. And if you do judge, first of all, who are you to judge another man's servant? And Satan is the accuser of the brethren. And who is my brother? But if you judge, I will judge you by the standard that you use. So, I will call you out on your sincere hypocrisy, right? Mm-hmm. I will show you how your sincere intentions were absolutely hypocritical, right? Mm-hmm. That's how God will judge us. He will hold up a mirror, right? So now, that's just background of Matthew. The culmination of this is Matthew 25. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, right? In his glory, the glory of God will descend to earth. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, he will judge the nations. Now, I always applied that personally, because then he talks about the sheep and the goats. And it's good to apply that personally. I gave a sermon in Estonia about this subject, about the sheep and the goats. And because I was invited back at this anniversary thing with a church that had split down the middle, and I was no longer part of that group, but I was respected enough they invited me, and I tried to come up with the right sermon. And I said, look, we should want to be a sheep, not a goat. Mm-hmm. I looked at it personally, and I asked the question, what's the difference between a sheep and a goat, and how do we ensure that when the time comes, we're going to be part of the goats? And I said, it's hard. This is a harder question than you think, because they're so alike. Neither the sheep nor the goats recognized Christ. They were like those disciples that walked on the road and Christ was with him explaining things, and then he was taken up from them, and then they realized that was Christ with us, right? They didn't recognize Christ, neither the sheep nor the goats, because they both said, when did we see you? The sheep gave a glass of water to those who were thirsty, and the goats did not. But both the goats and the sheep said, when did we see you? Because he said, you gave me a glass of water, or you didn't give me. They both said, when did we see you? Neither of them recognized Jesus. So I said, we need to stop going around trying to figure out who is and who isn't. We need to stop making any judgment about the person. The sheep saw Christ in everyone.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Indiscriminately. So they didn't like, when did we see you? Well, you saw Christ in everyone.
Exactly.
Just like the Passionists were teaching. If you see Christ in everyone, you will be a sheep.
Yes.
But here's what gets really fascinating. So that's great at a personal level, but I came to realize, wait, it's not talking personally. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, he will judge the nations.
Mhm.
Well, guess what? What we haven't talked about in this story is World War II is well known because of the Holocaust.
Right.
Now, we've had a lot of debate about that in recent years because of recent events, but World War II is about the Holocaust. You go to the gates of Dachau, it says, ni vida, ne plus jamais, never again. And then the Russian phrase, which I've forgotten, even though I studied Russian, I forget what the exact phrase is in Russian, in those 4 languages on the gate. Never again will we have that degree of inhumanity, and it was addressed at the Jews. But what happened after World War II is the Jews were able to establish a nation, the state of Israel, which was promised to them unanimously by the League of Nations, which America never joined. It was never followed through on. But in 1948, the Jewish state was established. The other thing that was established in 1948, independently, but I think they're connected, was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights establishes things like make sure that everybody has clean water to drink, right?
Mhm.
You gave me a glass of water. Make sure that everyone has clothing. You gave me clothing. Make sure that people are treated fairly when they're in prison. You came to visit me in prison. Make sure that people have adequate minimal health care. You came and visited me when I was sick. The standards of Matthew by which the Son of Man would judge the world are the standards of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And that is how the world has declared it wishes to be judged.
Right. Right.
And God says, that is how I will judge you. And what also happened in 1948 was the establishment of the State of Israel. I'm not going to make any comment about how people should think about this, but I'm going to say there's something very big going on this planet.
I agree with you. Yeah.
World War II was just a precursor to make us aware of the thing that we said we would never do again.
Mhm.
And this story is so critical to the heart of that spiritual principle and the judgment of all mankind. What I love about your story, and this is really just coming to me now, is the fact that it is so multifaceted, that it forces us to examine and look at ourselves and other people in ways we never would have, because those people in that crucible of a microcosm within a cosm within a macrocosm, it's revealing.
And you see, that is exactly the exploration that I wanted to do, is to see these people that, we have, a very limited perception of. I wanted to see these people go through that process of learning to see, the divine in each other. Yeah. And not only in Germans, but also in the people that were around, right in front of them, that were suffering. And there were, you have to read the book to understand the context of that. But they saw people that were suffering right in front of their eyes. And what was interesting to me is how they took Passionist ideology, the idea that we are all sacred, all life is sacred, and they were applying it. So, and I think that ultimately that's the message that I really want people to, that I want to resonate with people, because we live in such divided times. And what I want people to understand is that the things that unite us are so much more important and so much more profound than the things that divide us.
Yeah. Amen. This nation, you might say, is more divided than at any time since the Civil War.
Very true.
And over what? What are the issues now? Well, there's a plethora of issues. There's not just one issue. I think it's about how we interpret events, how we interpret the world, and almost more so the chosen path forward, right? Well, guess what? America has always been a kind of a grand experiment, a project. And we have elected leaders, presidents who come in for 4 years, and we have, the pendulum swings this way and it swings that way. I've seen some comments from my good friend Dan Sanderson, who's the founder of Blank Zip, a philosophical website, and I shared with him a quote which he calls a Wadeism, that we laugh about, which is, we lurch forward from ditch to ditch, right? We lurch forward as a species from ditch to ditch. We cross the middle of the road briefly for a nanosecond on our way, making a beeline into the other ditch, because we can't really get together and say, you know what? I might be on the right, but I understand where the left is coming from. And I can actually see how they arrive at that conclusion. Or I'm on the left, and I can understand how it appears to them that, this is a better way, right? And I don't have to call them a racist as they try to resolve inequity in a way that's a little bit different than the way I would go about it. They might be just as much about fairness and equity as I am, maybe even more so.
Right.
They're going about it a different way. They think there's a different path to get to the result we all want, which is a more fair and just and equitable society.
Right.
But we can't have those conversations. We're too busy labeling each other, throwing each other into hell. And that's the tragedy of religion in the Christian world, right?
Yeah.
Throwing people into hell over the tiniest little doctrinal differences. And the Passionists seem to have found a way through that.
They have. And that to me, it spoke so much, so deeply as soon as I realized what that message was. And if people read this book and, they want to learn more about the Passionists, that's a victory to me, because I feel like what they have to say right now at this time is so important. And, it plays out in this book. So, yeah.
Well, let's have an altar call right now. How many of you want to come forward and buy the book? I'm just kidding. But you must go to Amazon, and it is called The Sower of Black Field. And there it is with those awards on it. I should reverse my camera now. How do I do that? No, that's the maximize button.
There's one more slide that has more than those 2 awards. In fact, it's gotten 6 major awards. So
well, let's quickly go to that slide, and then we'll wrap this up. So we'll go through the last slide set and wrap this up.
I'll stop you when I see it. There it is. Yeah. So even more recently, it won it was a category winner in the religious fiction in the 2025 Independent Press Awards. So, this is beginning award after award after award. It's gotten, several 5-star reviews, and it's gotten it's gotten a good rating from Kirkus Reviews, which is very prestigious. So
That's awesome. That is awesome. Well, Katherine, what words do you want to leave our audience with tonight before we do the last thing I have to do, which is the sneak peek for next week's show?
I think there's so many reasons to pick up this book. Aside from learning about this obscure episode in World War II history. There's so much to learn, in the history, but also pick it up to learn what the Passionists are about, and to really, to get a very vivid exploration of what life was like during that time, for these people and how they were reacting to Passionist ideology.
Awesome. Well, we're out of time. There were so many great comments. I'm sorry we couldn't get into more of them. But based on that, I'm sure that many people would like to see you back on the show, and we'll look for that opportunity. So just thank you. It's been an honor. It's been an honor to have the chance to go through this with you, to sort of bask in the glory of what you've accomplished over the last 20 years. And we'll continue to hear good about this book and the resonance that I'm sure to receive. It gets out there more and more.
Thank you so much, Wade.
It's absolutely true, and it's my honor and pleasure. So we will try to have Katherine back for all those people in the audience who want that, and we'll go now to the sneak peek for next week, and we'll wrap up the show with that. And until then, may God be with you, and we'll see you all here next week, same time, same place. Hey everyone, it's Wade Franson. I'm back with another sneak peek. This time we have Luke Workington, who's a returning guest for his second appearance. And the reason is we've rebranded the show this year to Building Vibrant Communities. And this is right up Luke's alley because of a new program that you've launched, Luke, about studying the Holy Word of God. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's great to be back, Wade. I'm really excited for what you guys are doing. And I'm even more excited that people can fall in love with the Word of God and therefore the God of the Bible. And we have this program, we call it The Bible is Alive. And what we do is we take people through the Bible, not just chronologically or, start in Genesis, go end in Revelation, but it's really 3 or 4 chapters a day, but with supporting verses. So what does this passage in the Old Testament have to do with the New? And when Jesus said, I didn't come to do away with the old covenant, but I came to fulfill it. What does that mean? And how does it apply to our lives in the daily application? So every day, it's either in podcast form on YouTube, or you can just read at your own pace, however you like it. And it's a lot of fun. We just want people to get ready, get their hearts ready. I think, look at the last 2 years in our world, all this stuff that's going on. We're seeing, I believe, biblical prophecy unfolding before our very eyes. And I think we should study that Bible. I think we should understand the God of the Bible and his plan for you and me and whoever's listening. God has a plan for your life. And I hope you tune in. I think it's going to be a really interesting discussion.
Amen. And I can testify that, as you look at me now, you see I'm no longer a spring chicken. I've been studying the Bible my entire life. And every time I read read a verse, no matter how familiar, with a humble, open mind, some new insight arrives. And we understand more fully as the world conditions unfold. And looking back in history and seeing where we're at now, the Bible has more relevance than ever. And I imagine that your program helps people make the Bible relevant and apply it to their daily lives. How do you accomplish that in your program?
Yeah, so it's a very unique plan that helps people connect those dots in real time, but also every day you get a short 2.5, 3-minute teaching so it's divided up into daily themes, right? And so how do we not just ingest the Word of God and understand it, but what's the daily takeaway? What's the aha moment? How does this get real and personal for us? And interesting stat, I think your listeners might like this, but last year there was a 40-year high in the sale of Bibles all around the world.
Wow.
So people are hungry for truth. They're hungry for something real, not just what politicians say or the media or movies or what culture is saying to us, but what is God Almighty, these eternal truths going all the way back to Genesis. What is that truth and how do we apply it to our lives? That's what we're going to talk about.
Well, that's exciting. And we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of this. So you are not going to want to miss episode 136 airing on February 4th with Luke Workington, Falling in Love with the Word of God. We'll see you there.